This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
Well, hello there. Man, is it good to be back in the saddle. Yes, I went silent for a couple of weeks. Now I am here to tell my story. Oh, look, I brought a slide projector. Actually, I will be sharing a few photographs of what I've been up to over the last 2 weeks. I actually spent about 10 days out of country. And what I did was my wife and I had planned a trip earlier this year. We finally carried it out and traveled to Germany to see my son, who is studying in Heidelberg, and my daughter, who lives in Lower Saxony. Also got to meet my grandkids for the first time. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But it was a wonderful opportunity. And I have this love-hate relationship with long flights. Those of you who've done international travel, you understand this. Intercontinental flights. I mean, you travel an incredible distance, literally halfway around the world, but, man, my butt was sore after just a few hours of sitting in that airline seat. And I have figured it out. I'd like to have this conversation with Einstein someday in the great hereafter, as we talk about his theory of relativity and compression of time and so forth, time dilation, etc. I think that time slows down almost to a complete stop right about hour 4 of a 10-hour flight. That's the perception that I have. That's when it's like, oh my gosh, well, I'll close my eyes and just sit back with my noise-canceling earbuds and try to relax for a little bit and maybe even doze off a little bit, and I feel like, okay, I slept. That was an hour. We knocked an hour off. Look at my watch. Nope. That was 5 minutes or 15 minutes, and it's just, oh, this is so miserable. Anyway, that was the downside. The upside was it was really great to get a chance to go over to Germany, really travel the country. We spent a lot of time on the trains and traveling back and forth to visit my son, and just a few observations. But first, I got to tell you this. My grandkids are 4 and 2. And I've done video chats with them, and, we've waved and cooed at them, but this is the first time I got to see them in person. And I always marvel at how my capacity to love expands as new family come into my life. And I loved these kids before, but man, I'm telling you, when I met them, it was such a sublime experience. And I know you're bragging on your grandkids. Well, I kind of am, but it was just, it's so sweet. And I think there's a lesson in here somewhere. And the lesson is, despite everything that's going on, despite the craziness, and by the way, there was a lot of craziness while I was out of the country. Can I not leave this country for a week without you guys convicting a former president of 34 felonies and et cetera? Anyway, it reminds me of something that one of my mentors, Paul Rosenberg, pointed out some years ago. And that is that sense of renewal that you experience when you hold a baby. Now, I'm going to amend this a little bit and say, too, when you hug a small child, or when a small child comes up and tells you that they love you, there is a very interesting sense of hope, because you're talking to and dealing with an unadulterated, innocent little heart. And we don't remember what that was like. For most of us, we were innocent at one time. We saw the world through eyes of wonder. We appreciated things at a whole different level because we were experiencing them and learning about them for the very first time. And then along the way, we kind of get jaded. And the innocence is either, beaten out of us, or we make mistakes. And these days, it seems like there's this all-out attack on innocence. I don't probably need to go into a lot of detail for that. There's plenty of reminders if you just look around and notice all the pretty colors these days. But to see kids who are still just in that pure state, where politics hasn't infected their thinking, where they're not about, there are quests for power. Oh yes, sibling rivalry, that's a real thing, but there's not this inbred or ingrained hatred, I should say, that's been trained into them. That comes later, and unfortunately that affects a lot of us as adults. But they're still at that wonderful innocent stage, and it's reassuring to remember we all started out that way. And sadly, it feels like we don't get to stay there for very long. The world tries to strip that innocence away as quickly as possible. And frankly, a lot of the activities that are going on throughout this month seem to convey a message not of happiness and inclusion and everyone is welcome here, because they're certainly not welcome. Not everybody. But it's more a matter of, if we can't be innocent, then neither can you. So I needed that reminder that, there are still some things in the world that are very right. And this was one of them. Now, let me talk about a couple of observations while traveling. First and foremost, Germany, like a lot of European countries, is having an incredible influx of immigrants. And I'm going to avoid using the term illegal, because I'm not sure if they're illegal or not. Fact is, they are coming there by the boatload or the train load, and they are there. One thing I noticed that was a very big difference from the last time I was there, which was in late 2019, went there for Christmas, was the amount of graffiti. Now, in bigger cities, I expect this, right? Bigger cities, more people, there's going to be more gangs, there's going to be more young people with time on their hands. I've never seen graffiti at this level, though, and it was everywhere I went, even in small towns. If there was a blank spot, there was often graffiti. But I also noticed there was a huge number of, and I'm sorry if this sounds judgmental, but I'm going to say Middle Eastern or otherwise, Islamic young men standing around with time on their hands, or gathered, in small groups. And it wasn't, I know you'll hear horror stories sometimes, like out of London. Oh, they've got the whole quarters where you can't even go because this is no longer London. But they're very clearly a very open influence, and, nobody gave us any trouble, although it was interesting. The day we went to meet my son, we met up in Mannheim, and about an hour before we arrived in Mannheim, apparently an Islamist stabbed some far-right political commentator. They call him far-right, but it was someone who has some very vocal opinions on, what is happening to his country and his society. And the fact that, hey, we're being told that we are disposable and that it's in our interest to allow all of these people to come in and basically supplant our culture, take benefits from our government, which of course are paid for by the productive citizens through exorbitantly high taxation. And this outspoken commentator was stabbed. The knifeman was knocked off by another person who apparently was from that far right, in air quotes, side. And of course, it's the far right that the government has really been keeping an eye on. And so a policeman tackles the guy who tackled the stabber and is trying to control him. And the policeman's just completely oblivious to the fact that the dude with the knife gets up right until the moment that guy stuck that knife in the policeman's neck. And yes, it killed him. After that, the stabber was shot by another member of the Polizei, and, he survived. But anyway, the tension is very real. And apparently this is true in other places in Europe as well. Somebody made the comment, well, the German people are kind of getting that look in their eye again. And it's not because they're turning into Nazis. It's because they see their culture being deliberately undermined. And that's not to say that, just immigration in general is what undermines a culture. Flooding cultures and societies, though, with large numbers of people who are there either to collect benefits or are there simply to supplant whatever the existing culture is. I don't know. It doesn't seem like that good of an idea. And I'm a guy who's been an open borders type of person for a long, long time. I still believe it's the ideal. But when you have millions upon millions of people coming into a culture with no incentive to assimilate, it's not good. It creates divisions where there weren't divisions before, and I think that may actually be by design. Now, yesterday, there were elections held all throughout Europe. And by the way, the political posters were everywhere you looked. I actually saw some pretty funny defacement of political posters, too, which was refreshing. I don't know. It just tells me there are people kind of sick of it. But it wasn't necessarily a far-right wave. And I even hate that I'm using the term far-right. But basically, the people who are normal, who appreciate, their culture, who appreciate family, who appreciate responsive government, who don't want to be told, you have to give up everything, that you cherish. Man, they voted out a lot of the really hard left, environmentalist, extremist politicians. So bad that French President Macron actually dissolved their parliament, and they're going to have to hold snap elections. Now, I don't tell you that to say, well, see, and this means that everything's getting fixed. What it means is the people are reaching a breaking point where they're just not willing to put up with it. I suspect something very similar is happening here. And the fact that Donald Trump now is saddled with 34 different felonies. By the way, I don't know that hurts his chances for re-election. I think that he may have actually been handed the White House because of this incredible lawfare campaign conducted by the Democrats. And that's dangerous in the sense that they're going to have to either imprison him or kill him to stop him. And the crazy thing is, I think they're desperate enough they might do exactly that.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, welcome back to the show. Just a couple other quick thoughts on what we saw happen in the European elections and what it might portend for us. I knew I had seen this on Twitter, and I had thankfully liked this particular tweet. And I wanted to share this with you because the spin right now coming through the media is, well, the far right won the European elections. And you see a lot of this right now going on here in the U.S. as well. We got to do something about the far right. These guys are domestic terrorists. They're extremists, whatever. Well, what exactly does the far right support? And I'm putting this in air quotes, far right. Do you want to end illegal immigration? Do you want to put criminals in jail? Do you support free speech as opposed to punishing anything that disagrees with the official narrative? If you don't wish to sexualize kids or see others try to sexualize them, if you support peace, if you are patriotic, if you are strong, I mean physically strong, if you celebrate family and having kids, if you want to preserve your national culture and identity, if you wish to put your country first, if you want to ban sex changes for kids who are too young to consent to what they're doing, the permanent changes that they're implementing, if you oppose ESG and DEI, which are just fancy ways of implementing Marxist principles, if you are anti-communist, if you want to promote sovereignty, meaning the final resting place of power is appropriate, not with some multi-transnational, shadowy organization where there is no real accountability. If you want to cut regulations, if you want to build, if you want to innovate, always. If you want to celebrate things that are great, that are true, that are beautiful. If you want to be meritocratic, in other words, reward people according to what merit they have. If you support energy independence. If you want to deport people who have come without permission and are not here producing or otherwise contributing to the overall well-being of society. If you want to end wokeness in schools as well as in the military. If you support the right to self-defense. That is what makes you a far-right individual, my friend. And yet, if you think about it, that was sanity just a few short years ago. Now, Jeffrey Tucker from the Brownstone Institute also says 3 of the huge issues in European elections that seriously bruised the establishment, and it was the establishment that did take a good gut punch yesterday. Number 1, he says the COVID policy response, shot mandates, closures, fake science that led to devastating inflation. Yeah, America wasn't the only place that happened. Secondly, he points to immigration upheavals in which nations as cultural and in nations as cultural and political entities seem to be targeted as dispensable. Now, if you understand your history, if you understand your culture, if you understand the principles and practices on which it was founded, and I'm speaking primarily of America, but I think this would be true in other countries as well. Of course, you're going to have some reservations. Well, yeah, we should just throw that away because someone came along with something they say is better. And last but not least, and this is a big one, the climate change stampede of elites to end traditional energy sources and throttle traditional food sources. By the way, have you heard the growing clamor over, bird flu, we got to test every cattle in America every couple of weeks. This is about controlling the food chain. And boy, you will not find a more green conscious society than German society. Solar panels everywhere, wind turbines everywhere. Throwing out the garbage is kind of an exercise in, okay, we got paper here, plastic here, bio here. You know, it's very strictly regulated. You do not mix your trash, or there are rules and there are fines, and electric cars everywhere. Actually, the cars, it was very interesting. Cars keep getting smaller. You see more and more electric vehicles. To their credit, they have a pretty fair amount of charging stations. But bicycles and walking are also very common for getting around. And I hate to say this because, again, if it's done at the public's expense, does the public want it? But the train system there is remarkable. And I was able to see so much more of that country by train. And it was just incredible. Would do it again in a heartbeat. I know it's not feasible, doesn't translate exactly here because we have so much, unpopulated land. But here's the point that Jeffrey Tucker's making. He says, some people, and he's talking about those in power, clearly overplayed their hands. Is this the people's revolution taking place finally? He goes, well, actually, he goes, I've kind of sensed my own political outlook is more moderate than I once believed, but the actual temperature on the ground appears to be far more hot than his own belief system. He says, now the fury is very intense, and the people who manage this system, whatever it is, are in the tiny minority, and this election seems to confirm that instinct. I believe there's a similar dynamic that's at work here in America. I think that people have reached the point where they are fed up. Some of the things that have come out about COVID just in the last couple of weeks, among them, Fauci survived his grilling. And you sound disappointed. Well, I am. Because frankly, I would have liked to see him led away in handcuffs at the end of his congressional hearing. But Teflon Tony, for whatever it's worth, seems to have survived. Did throw a few of his coworkers under the bus, but we now find out that there was a lot of concealment of information, keeping it from the public's eye. The whole lab leak theory, which was treated as a conspiracy theory and, was justification for throttling you on social media. Well, it turns out that, no, that actually does appear to be the case. Our government helped fund, with taxpayer dollars, research and especially gain-of-function research on a coronavirus, which was then souped up in a virus lab in Wuhan, China, and somehow, I presume it was accidentally, was released. And it was followed by lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine mandates. Oh, and by the way, the vaccine itself, for the first time I saw a newspaper headline, this was out of the UK, saying that the what did they call it? Unprecedented rise in unexpected or unexplained deaths may be due to the vaccine. That's huge. And by the way, I'm pretty sure that YouTube at least still, has their AI searching out anything that mentions, we have to remove your content, Brian. You said something that's not allowed. So this is my question for you. Why would that not be allowed? Why would people not be allowed to question such things? I think we probably both know the answer, right? It's a little too close to the truth. At any rate, it's just getting crazier by the moment. Donald Trump, of course, his trial and conviction, and who knows where that goes from here, but they're still going after people for January 6th. People who committed no crime. I read about, this was a former military officer who went to Washington, D.C. in January of 2021. He went there to hear the speeches. He came after, what's his name, Ray Epps and his entry crew had opened up the bicycle barriers and had let people through. So there was nothing blocking him, no tape, no cops stopped him. He walked into the Capitol, walked around, took a look. Apparently, he found some flex cuffs that a cop had dropped, picked them up and carried them along with him. I don't remember what he did with them. He didn't keep them, but he actually admonished one of the protesters who was sitting in the vice president's chair in the Senate, saying, hey, that's disrespectful. You didn't earn the right to be there. You need to get out of his chair. And then he asked the police officer, hey, which way do I get out of here? And the officer said, there, I'll show you, and actually walked him to an exit, and away he went. And he was arrested and tried, and well, you had cuffs. You were there to kidnap and to execute the vice president. And I guess the bottom line is your government has most definitely been weaponized against anyone who questions what is being done to us. And for a lot of people, this is going to be, ample excuse to, I better shut up, keep my head down, don't make any eye contact, do not draw any attention to myself. But I need you to ask yourself, if you knew that this was happening for sure, would that be the right response? Or would you be willing to stand up and be counted even if there is risk attached?
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, welcome back to the show. Wow. I really have been away for a while because I'm just, you wind me up and away I go. I have got so much on my mind and so much to share. So let's get to a couple of articles. I've grabbed a couple great ones for today's show. And the first one I want to share with you is it has to do with how the world around us has changed. Now, specifically, I'm talking to those of us who came of age, in the 1980s. We were the children of the 70s, and I saw this article by Lenore Skenazy on intellectualtakeout.org. What 70s kids did that today's kids don't. And this one hit me hard because, hell, I was there, man. I lived it. Louise Bate Ames, she says, is one of the psychologists who popularized the idea of childhood or child development milestones. And in the late 1970s, she wrote a series of books that outlined what kids are capable of at different ages. And the one you might have heard about is Your 6-Year-Old, Loving and Defiant. Well, thanks to Chicago blogger Christy Whitley, who reprinted Ames' 1979 readiness list for neurotypical kids entering first grade, it has since become kind of a cultural touchstone. You'll find it quoted in The Coddling of the American Mind, co-authored by Let Grow co-founder Jonathan Haidt, and other articles, even her Free-Range Kids book. And you might ponder how much childhood has changed, or how childhood has changed so much in just a generation or two. And she says, by changed, we mean how it has constricted so severely, how we went from trusting kids to infantilizing them. How many of us like to be infantilized? So she says, let's reprint this iconic list here to create more pondering and maybe a renewed recognition of how much kids can do and have done until very recently. But the point is, we used to let them. So, the Child Development Milestone Checklist, this is for kids age 6, by Louise Bates Ames. Maybe you recognize that you got to do some of these things or more. Number 1, will your child be 6 years, 6 months or older when he begins first grade and starts receiving reading instruction? Does your child have 2 to 5 permanent or second teeth? Can your child tell in such a way that his speech is understood by a school crossing guard or a policeman where he lives? In other words, can he tell them where he lives in a comprehensible way? Can he draw and color and stay within the lines of the design being colored? Can he stand on one foot with eyes closed for 5 to 10 seconds? Can he ride a small bicycle without helper wheels? Can he tell left hand from right? Can he travel alone in the neighborhood 4 to 8 blocks to the store, the school, the playground, or to a neighbor's home or a friend's home, rather? Can he be away from you all day without being upset? Can he repeat an 8 to 10 word sentence if you say it once? An example would be, the boy ran all the way home from the store. Can he count 8 to 10 pennies correctly? Does your child try to write or copy letters or numbers? Now, Lenore Skenazy says it's strange to read this, right? It's like a cuneiform recipe for tuna casserole, something we're familiar with, but we just don't make much anymore. But what if we did? She asked, what if we sent our kids out to travel alone 4 to 8 blocks to a store? Wouldn't that be thrilling? What if we had them go knock on a friend's door, as archaic as that sounds? Wouldn't it be fun? What if we let them go to the park with friends? Wouldn't they enjoy playing in the real world instead of just online? Well, she says the only thing stopping us from doing any of those things is that we've lost our ability to see kids as competent. To regain it, we must put the cart before the horse. In other words, send our kids out before we are quite sure that they or we can handle it. And then see the results. Now, whether they're immediately successful or not, that doesn't really matter. It's like kids taking their first steps. Once they start walking, even with some stumbles, no one ever says, great, now go back to crawling. Her point is that kids in the 70s were not another species. Let your 6-year-old walk to the park, and you'll see it for yourself. Man, that felt like a straight-up dose of common sense, and I appreciate her sharing that. All right, I want to shift gears now and point you to another article. Look, social media. I spent a lot of time on social media as I was cooling my heels at the airport or even sitting on the train and just, I'm sitting there scrolling through social media. It's a very pleasant pastime, great way to, waste time as well. But there's a downside. And Paul Rosenberg has a great essay on how social media hijacks the subconscious mind. He says anything that affects the subconscious minds of billions of people on a daily basis is a very serious thing. And that's precisely what has happened over the past decade as social media captured a large percentage of human cognition. Now, he says, I'm very aware I'm running against the stream. Mine, to be honest about it, is a small, largely unwanted voice. Still, someone needs to say these things, and the truth is that social media directly replaces natural subconscious functions. Or perhaps more accurately, it displaces subconscious operations and acts in their place. And Paul says that is very, very dangerous. So as we go through this, he says, please understand, I'm not saying these things precisely simply because, no one really knows how to say them precisely. Any expert on the subject could be attacked by a half dozen contrary experts, each with their own theory of the unconscious. So he says those who need to find fault may proceed as they must. I'm doing my job all the same because fear of the critic spawns self-censorship. And we very much need to address this. So what social media does, Paul describes like this. He says, I cannot affix a percentage to how much social media displaces our inborn subconscious minds because no one knows how to measure these things. But that it does displace the human subconscious is easy to establish. So here's some direct support. First, without a doubt, our subconscious minds filter sensory inputs, delivering just a fraction of them to our conscious minds. Also, without a doubt, social media does the same thing, sifting through all the inputs in its system which double, counteract, or displace a large number of our own sensory inputs and delivering to its user those inputs which serve the system's needs. Next, he says our subconscious minds search our internal data banks for relevant memories. Well, social media does the same thing, again, displacing human operations while monetizing them. Our subconscious minds trigger involuntary reactions like disgust, outrage, and revulsion. Social media hijacks this process and pulls such reactions out of its users rather than allowing them to form naturally. He says our subconscious minds recognize and process impressions of status. Now, advertising has long monetized this, but social media monitors the user's reactions and triggers them very precisely, accelerating and directing the process. Social media corporations have employed and do employ a large number of professionals precisely to develop routines to increase user engagement, which might as well be honest and call it addiction, thus increasing their profits. More or less all of this involves subconscious vulnerabilities. If not, these companies would simply reason with their users, convincing them to engage more. So if you're trying to make people do something, and if you're not openly convincing them, you're left with hijacking their instincts, aka their subconscious operations. And he reminds us more than 12 years ago, Facebook ran an experiment on 685,000 unknowing users to see if their system could, by tweaking headlines, change the subconscious moods of their users. And indeed they could. Not only that, but they measurably changed the moods of those users' friends. He says, I'll leave you to speculate on what they've done with that information in the last few years. So he says, I know very well that half the world has raced into social media and will defend their choices as only pre-committed humans can, but still, facts stand. Now he says, for those still with me, please bear in mind that by using social media, you are being provided with a custom environment created specifically for you and specifically for you on that day. Once immersed in that environment, you'll be thinking and feeling in response to personalized stimuli. Your decisions will then be fed into a monstrous data system, a system that's most definitely not centered on your interests. Social media operations are the most informed, most intimate, most adaptable systems of manipulation that have ever experienced, or existed rather. And by far. And he says we also should bear in mind that this work is being done by computers at a near zero per instance cost. And yes, these systems are quite able to drink from a fire hose. They use heuristics that thrive on it and even require it. So he says, if my argument is at all correct, we'd expect to see masses of humans who can be led directly from one collective stampede to another, despising those who refuse to join them. We'd also see whistleblowers, psychologists, raising warnings, people obsessively checking their feeds, and people who are unable to walk away even though part of them is convinced that they should. Ooh, that one stung. In the end, he says social media functions by usurping free will. It is properly a mind parasite. Moreover, humanity has no natural immunity to this type of parasite simply because no such thing has ever previously existed. Finally, he says, I'll remind everyone that 25 years ago, we had none of these free systems, and free really should have been a clue. Nonetheless, we lived in heated houses, we drove cars, we had jobs and friends, we read books, fell in love, got married, and had children. But he says what we didn't have was mind parasites, at least like this. And we did at least as well without those mind parasites. Yep, that one hit hard. I think there's great truth in what he's saying. But the addiction part of this makes me really feel uncomfortable because stepping away from social media, I don't know if I can do that.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show. This is the Bryan Hyde Show.
All right, welcome back. This is our final segment of today's show. I have to take a quick moment here and express my gratitude to the folks who reached out to me. And it was just a handful of people who were like, hey, this has been part of my daily routine, and I noticed you haven't posted any new shows, anything going on. So thank you for thinking of it. Thank you for, first of all, being a patron of this show. I really do appreciate it, and it means the world to me that, first of all, you find enough value in what I'm putting out there that you would, give it a listen. I never know who this is reaching. I like Paul Rosenberg. I feel like I'm a very small, mostly insignificant, and largely unwanted voice out there. But I also understand that there are people who are looking for what it is that I have to offer. And so each time I sit down behind this microphone, my goal is to offer the very best that I have for you, that ultimately leaves you feeling more certain of who you are and what you stand for than just simply, here's what makes me mad, and by gosh, now I'm going to go out and be mad. So thank you. Your support and your encouragement is so greatly appreciated, and I've come back with just a renewed sense of continue on doing what I'm doing. The world's not getting any easier. You probably noticed that too. But we ultimately have a lot of say in how we respond to the things that are going on around us. And I'm grateful for all the different influences of other people who likewise are finding their voice and putting it out there so that they too can contribute something that's positive, that's uplifting, a little, daily shot of optimism to keep people going through otherwise pretty challenging and discouraging times. All right, 3 articles that I would like to point your attention to. First one talks about the push for green energy. Now, this is Doug Casey, who, as you know, is one of my favorite commentators. And this is him talking about, how the politicians, the media, large corporations are all promoting solar and wind energy as replacements for fossil fuels. And Western governments are trying to pick winners by subsidizing wind and solar energy to the tune of billions. And Doug has some great answers on, these things can be useful, but he's like, still, oil and fossil or hydrocarbons, I should say, are the fuel that run the world. In fact, what he comes away with, and I thought this was a really well stated observation, is the U.S. economy, for instance, in this regard to becoming more green, is being Sovietized, which is to say directions increasingly come from apparatchiks and political cadres as opposed to letting people decide what they want in the market. By the way, coming back from Europe, I can tell you it's more true than ever over there as well. So Doug says if you value democracy, the only democratic way of organizing things economically is you let the market decide. But in a green society, humans and markets are seen as the enemy, things to be reduced and eliminated. And that's something I think all of us are getting a little bit better acquainted with. So I recommend that article. Again, it's in today's show notes. These are show notes for June 10th, 2024 at thebryanhydeshow.com. Here's another great one, and this is from the Brownstone Institute. The Reverend John F. Naugle has a terrific essay on community and boundaries. Without community and boundaries, he says, they win. And he's talking about the people who are trying to impose absolute control over us, whether it be over free speech, whether it be over our free association, whatever it may be. And he points out that wokeism, COVIDianism, and climate apocalypticism are indeed the de facto theology of the class of the elites and expertocracy. It's true. If you don't bend the knee to these ideologies, they will single you out for special treatment. And one of the things that Reverend Naugle points out is that these people have massive boundary issues. Look, obviously not everybody's going to agree with, for instance, the content of, what was his name? The place kicker, Harrison Butker, who spoke to a commencement address here, or at a commencement exercise last month. Spoke about traditional Catholic themes, received a standing ovation, but boy, people freaked out. The NFL has to fire this guy. He's not being inclusive, blah, blah, blah. And yes, of course, people may have disagreements. But he says, not everybody is going to agree with the contents of Butker's remarks, but he says the people who are criticizing him and trying to cancel him don't know where their boundaries end and others begin. So they consider it within their purview to control the way other people think, feel, and speak. Such people are by definition pathological. Another example of this would be Spokane, Washington. Oh, my goodness. They have painted this incredibly large pride mural. It's the flag, right? It's the multicolored weird symbol that if you put four of them together and just rotate each one of them 90 degrees, you legitimately get a swastika. A rainbow-colored one, but it is a swastika. And I can't help but wonder if that was a bug or a feature. But they painted it on a roadway. But if you leave tire tracks on it, and apparently 3 teenagers riding scooters were just riding over it, and they may have left some little mild skid marks, but these teens were arrested and charged with some kind of felony mischief. Felonies. As in the kind of thing that will follow them for the rest of their lives. Why would you put a mural or something you consider so sacred on the roadway if you don't expect people to drive over it, walk over it, etc.? And it's kind of become this battleground now. The police have actually put up this 24-hour surveillance camera there at taxpayer expense. By the way, I've heard that Spokane has some real problems in terms of a lot of crime, a lot of homelessness. They're experiencing some of the same difficulties that Seattle and Portland are in that, they're typical left-run cities. But no, we have to watch and make sure that people aren't thinking improper thoughts or not genuflecting before they cross at this street crossing where there's this flag painted on the pavement. Why would you put something sacred on the pavement in the first place? But I think we're kind of getting our own answer. And this really appears to be exactly what some have claimed it is, and that is it's a religion. It's a woke religion, and if you blaspheme by not agreeing with it or stepping on it or something like that, you are in big trouble. So I recommend that you rediscover the power of the word no. And that doesn't mean you need to go do a burnout on a pride flag on the ground or anything like that. But take a look at what Reverend John F. Naugle says about boundaries and community. It's a lot easier with community when you have people who are standing with you, who have your back. But rediscover the power of the word no. Now, this might mean, I'm a big Major League Baseball fan, and, I used to really enjoy going there, but now the games are getting pretty woke, and the players are being required to wear rainbow flags on their uniforms and so forth. You can always say no with your wallet. Well, I just said I won't be attending this year. I won't be paying for memorabilia and that kind of thing. Is it extreme? I'm sure to them it is. But is it really extreme to stand up for yourself and to establish your boundaries and maintain them? I don't think it is. In fact, I encourage people to do it. My only difference is I encourage people to do it without bringing more anger to the situation. All right, last but not least, I love this one. This was an article that Jim Quinn had published last week on LouRockwell.com. When we see this never-ending parade of mendacity from the ruling class, it can make us feel like things are hopeless. And I've talked to a few people in the last couple of weeks that kind of feel a sense of, I don't even look at politics anymore. Everything is so hopeless. And granted, if that is the main focus of your life, you're going to be feeling pretty hopeless, and it's by design. Now, I tend to take a look at politics as one facet, but he has a great article here that's, what do you need to do when you find yourself feeling like things are getting hopeless? Jim Quinn says that's when we need to ask ourselves, what would Josey Wales do? I know. Wait a minute. The outlaw Josey Wales? Exactly. And he starts with a quote from him. Now remember, when things look bad and it looks like you're not going to make it, then you got to get mean. I mean, plumb mad dog mean. Because if you lose your head and you give up, then you neither live nor win. That's just the way it is. I've been a fan of Clint Eastwood movies for quite a long time. But The Outlaw Josey Wales, made back in 1976, I believe is possibly his finest work. And Jim Quinn goes through, the making of the movie, how there were studio heads who were trying to, we got to calm this down. We got to, try and not make it have such an anti-government message. And Clint Eastwood eventually took over as the director because they fired the director who was trying to tone it down and make it a little more palatable, a little less anti-government. If you haven't seen that movie in a while, you might want to consider dusting it off and pay close attention, to the speech that Josey Wales has with the Indian chief, Ten Bears. Not only is it extremely well written, but there's a great deal of truth that comes through in that movie. And you probably relate more with Josey Wales than you think, which doesn't mean you go around killing everybody. After all, he wasn't a psychopath. He was a Missouri farmer who wanted to be left alone until an aggressor came to his home, killed his wife and his son, and tried to ruin everything beautiful that he had.
This is the Bryan Hyde Show.